The main way that schizoids usually are in control is by being in control of themselves more than really dictating to others, but strategies and ways will vary depending on the sort of childhood they've had. Welcome to Schizoid Vision. In this video, I'm going to be presenting issues related to the schizoid's need for control, and in particular, how this manifests in relationships in relation to schizoid defense mechanisms. Why do schizoids have a need for control? The schizoid need to control their environment is a defensive strategy that allows them to avoid the unpredictability of unexpected occurrences and the emotional demands of external interactions, which they may perceive as threatening to their autonomy and identity. One primary reason for this controlling behaviour is the schizoid's need to create a safe emotional distance. By controlling the dynamics of their relationships, they can ensure that interactions remain within a realm they find manageable and non-threatening, thus providing them with greater stability in an otherwise overwhelming world. This explains why schizoids need a sense of control. Inside or beneath the surface of a lot of schizoids, there's a lot of inner turmoil, and this is often detached from, which can result in emotions being muted or feeling of emptiness. The main way that schizoids usually are in control is by being in control of themselves more than really dictating to others, but strategies and ways will vary depending on the sort of childhood they've had, what they've learned growing up. If their full self system has developed an environment where there were very domineering people around them, it's likely that they can internalize and take on those characteristics. Though it doesn't mean that in all situations that they're going to go around throwing their weight around in a dominant way. For some schizoids, the emotional detachment and emptiness will lead to no desire for relationships. Others will have relationship ambivalence, where they may feel like they want to be in a relationship, but then at the same time feel that relationships are too overwhelming, so they withdraw from relationships. And then others will be in a married and committed relationship. Some of them, depending on their level of development, will be able to engage in emotional intimacy, whereas others will be in a committed relationship but still have issues with emotional intimacy and have the in and out pattern of being close and then creating distance again. I needed to make that point, and also that schizoids have different levels of emotional connectivity that they're able to attain in a relationship. So some schizoids are capable of more emotional expression than others, but in general, schizoids have a restricted range of emotional expression and different abilities to connect with that due to a lot of schizoids experiencing alexithymia, which means difficulty in reading their own emotions and understanding them, though they do tend to intellectualize their emotional experiences, which means looking at emotional aspects of their life in a logical and detached manner. As we go on, it will become clearer how controlling behaviors come into the equation. I've done a video on the master slave unit, the Masterson approach, and I will link it above and in the description if you want to learn more about the master slave unit. I broke it down into what I think it means, my interpretation and also my critiques of it. But I do agree that there are themes of master slave interactions in relationships, and self in exile also plays a role in schizoid dynamics. My main point was that the master slave relationship dynamics exists on a spectrum, so it's not always the extreme case of extreme domination or extreme submission. But when in relationships, there will be a master slave dynamic most of the time. The schizoid will play a role and will either gravitate towards a master role or a slave role. When the schizoid is in isolation, there's no role play because they're on their own. And when they're in this state, they've got higher potential to connect with their true self, whichever form that may be, or at least not have to be subjugated to other people's needs. So the key points I'd like to make on the master-slave relationships is these. The master-slave themes. Growing up with distance or punitive parents leads schizoids to associate love and attachment with control and submission. This manifests in adult relationships where they may oscillate between dominance and submission, reflecting the unresolved power dynamics from their childhood. If you're familiar with schizoid adaptations, it makes a point that a lot of schizoid behaviour is influenced by growing up in an environment where they weren't treated as a person in their own right, or there was hostility or neglect, basically misattunement with the primary caregiver. This misattunement with the primary caregiver that they experienced meant that they didn't express their personality in their home environment or in a relationship dynamic with the parent. And the parent was more likely to treat them as an object rather than a person, what they've learned growing up. If their full self system has developed in an environment where there were very domineering people around them, it's likely that they can internalize and take on those characteristics. Though it doesn't mean that in all situations that they're going to go around throwing their weight around in a dominant way. The schizoid individual will more relate to being told what to do and following along with what they had to do, rather than having a relationship with a parent where they could express their needs and have a reciprocal understanding. So that's where the master-slave themes originates from. So identification with caregivers. Schizoids may internalize the behaviors and attitudes of their controlling caregivers. This identification can lead them to adopt similar controlling behaviors in their relationships, perpetuating a cycle of dominance and submission. That's quite self-explanatory, and it goes along with what I said in the first paragraph. Fear of attachment and control. Schizoids often view attachments as a loss of control, which is inherently threatening to them. Fear of engulfment. In relationships, this fear can lead to behaviors where they either control their partner to avoid feeling vulnerable or become submissive to placate their partner's needs, thus avoiding confrontation and potential emotional pain. Difficulty asserting needs. A fundamental issue for schizoids can be their struggle to establish a clear sense of self separate from others. This lack of differentiation makes it difficult for them to assert their own needs and boundaries, often leading to a dynamic where they either dominate or are dominated in relationships. So this clarifies the reason for this dominant or compliant dynamic that can take place with other people in social relationships. Going on, psychological safety through control. By controlling their relationships, schizoids create a semblance of safety and predictability. This control helps them manage their anxiety and maintain emotional distance, thus protecting their fragile sense of self from being overwhelmed or engulfed. Fragile sense of self is linked to the schizoids often experiencing depersonalization or a lack of identity and not having a strong sense of self that is connected to the external world and developed in relation to the external world, because the true self is emotionally detached during social interactions and is protected and shielded from interactions with the external world. Projection and idealization. In some cases, schizoids project their disowned needs onto their partners, creating an idealized version of the relationship that satisfies their psychological requirements without demanding true emotional engagement. This can lead to a dynamic where the schizoid either overly depends on or dominates their partner to maintain this idealized union. This is back to the role play. So, a schizoid individual may have an idea mapped out in their mind about how an ideal relationship should function. This might be an intellectualized version of what makes a good relationship, and so they can interact with the relationship through these idealized roles, like playing the part of maybe an ideal wife, or trying to turn the husband into like their version of what they think is an ideal husband, in line with their personalized theories and thoughts on what is ideal. Ambivalent in higher functioning schizoids. Higher functioning schizoids may experience ambivalence towards the master slave relationship. They may recognize the unhealthy dynamics but struggle to break free to deeply ingrained patterns of relating formed in childhood. This is about recognition that there's something a bit off about having to either always be in control or being like the submissive one and not being able to really connect properly interpersonally. Automatic withdrawal in lower functioning schizoids. Lower functioning schizoids often respond to controlling dynamics with automatic withdrawal, retreating into fantasized relationships where they feel safe and in control. This withdrawal serves as a defense against the perceived threats of real life relational dynamics. This is about low functioning schizoids being more likely to want to just cut off from relationships altogether and just have relationships with people maybe in their mind through fantasy and not actually having like real life interactions, or if they are interacting with people, it being in a very minimal way because they're like very much withdrawn and they might not have developed much of the role playing side of their character when they're in the relationship. So it's going to be different from the higher functioning schizoid who would have more, potentially more of a sort of social presence, be it in the master slave dynamic. The reason for the master slave dynamic is because when schizoids interact with other people, they play a role and they adopt a full self or adopt a persona, which is played out via their full self system, which is part of the defense mechanism to keep the true self protected and shielded from interactions in the external world. Because this isn't an authentic expression of self in interactions or during interactions with other people, the role play is going to lean more towards a dominant role or a compliant role, as I have outlined on the spectrum here. So we go forward. The manifestations of controlling behaviour, setting strict boundaries. Schizoid individuals often establish rigid boundaries to maintain their sense of control and prevent others from getting too close. This behaviour helps them manage their anxiety without being overwhelmed or engulfed by another person. By keeping interactions within clearly defined limits, they feel safer and more control of the relationship dynamics. I want to make the point that this isn't about personal boundaries as such, like in relation to the true self. This is more boundaries that are asserted in the external world. So it might be something like, I'll only see you at weekends, or like other sort of limits that are put on more on the physical contact. It could be that when they're at home, that they would have a room, like maybe they might have like a den or somewhere where they go to, and it's like their partner's not allowed to come into that room without like permission or at sort of set times or under certain conditions. So that's like examples of setting strict boundaries. So it's very much about creating more of the physical distance, because schizoids are naturally emotionally detached during social relationships. The true self doesn't really need to. The true self is already detached. However, with extra boundaries in place, it gives the individual like more room for relaxation and predictability of what's going to be going on in the environment. Emotional withdrawal as control. By withholding emotional responses, individuals with schizoid dynamics can manage the depth of the relationship, keeping it at a superficial level where they feel safe and less vulnerable. This limits how much others can emotionally engage with them, effectively controlling the intimacy of the relationship. What I was just talking about is related to this. Intellectualization and rationalization. Instead of addressing emotional issues directly, schizoids may resort to intellectualization or rationalization. By framing problems in logical or abstract terms, they avoid emotional engagement and maintain control over the relationship's narrative. This behavior helps them distance themselves from uncomfortable emotions and stay detached. Self explanatory. Next, monitoring and surveillance. They keep close tabs on their partner's activities. May keep close tabs on their partner's activities, communications, and social interactions. This monitoring helps them feel secure by ensuring they are aware of any potential threats to the relationship's stability or their control over it. Avoidance of conflict. To avoid confrontations that could threaten their sense of control, schizoids might use avoidance tactics such as withdrawing or shutting down during disagreements. By avoiding conflict, they maintain the status quo and prevent any escalation that could lead to emotional vulnerability. Schizoids are naturally conflict avoidant, and part of this is due to the restricted emotional expression and also lack of spontaneity. So in an argument or disagreement, like most people, they will navigate it through their emotions and spontaneously coming out with things that they think and feel in response to another person. Because the schizoid has emotional detachment, this isn't something that a schizoid is really necessarily able to engage in easily. It would probably maybe depend on what the topic was about. They could control the relationship by not getting involved in what they might feel is unnecessary arguments or disagreements, and by shutting down it stops that sort of communication taking place. So it can be a controlling move, albeit through defenses. Dictating interaction terms. They may dictate when, how, and to what extent interactions or activities take place within the relationship. Controlling the terms of interactions allows them to engage only to the extent that they're comfortable, avoiding situations that might require deeper emotional involvement or spontaneity, which they find unsettling or overwhelming. Minimizing dependency. Actively avoiding situations where they might appear needy or dependent on others, or where others might depend on them. This control mechanism protects them from perceived risk associated with dependency, such as potential abandonment or the obligation to meet someone else's emotional needs. It maintains their self image as independent and self reliant. So, in relationships, they might maintain financial independence so that they're not dependent on their partner financially. They might choose to live apart so that they don't have to rely on the other person for support. They can get on with things on their own. There's a lot of different ways they can minimize dependency and maintain their independence whilst in a relationship. There's different ways this can go. Communication control. Controlling the flow and depth of communication, possibly through limiting discussions about certain topics or steering conversations to less personal subjects. By controlling communication, they can avoid topics or emotional depth that might expose more of their vulnerabilities. This ensures that conversations remain within a comfort zone that does not threaten their emotional detachment. Decision-making authority. They might take on the role of the primary decision-maker in the relationship, making unilateral decisions about significant matters. Being in control of decisions helps them feel secure and reduces the anxiety associated with shared decision-making and potential conflicts. What you can see here is that the controlling behaviour is very much focused on maintaining autonomy, maintaining self sufficiency, and maintaining independence. In this situation, the schizoid individual needs the other person to be a certain kind of way so that they can feel comfortable and function with that other person. And this is the reason for the need to exert control over the environment. It all comes back to avoiding the fear of engulfment and maintaining autonomy. Okay, so what are the obstructions to engaging in level interpersonal relationships? Why does it have to be dominance, compliance, master slave themes going on? It comes down to, I think, these factors: inability to express emotions. Schizoids' difficulty in acknowledging and expressing emotions creates a barrier to forming authentic connections with others as they struggle to engage in the emotional exchange needed for healthy relationships. Internal conflicts. Schizoids experience intense internal conflicts between their desire for connection and their fear of intimacy. This results in ambivalence towards relationships where they may oscillate between seeking closeness and withdrawing. Lack of negotiation skills. Schizoids' lack of skill in negotiating their needs and boundaries creates challenges in relationships as they often avoid or withdraw from social situations requiring compromise or discussion, leading to imbalanced dynamics and unresolved tensions. Lack of awareness of needs. Again, schizoids' limited awareness of their own needs creates a significant obstacle to building and maintaining relationships. This lack of self awareness leads to difficulties in recognizing and articulating their desires and requirements within a relationship, resulting in unmet needs. Fear of vulnerability. Schizoids may fear that revealing their true selves will lead to rejection or emotional harm. This fear prevents them from fully engaging in relationships. So that explains the reason for the master-slave relationship dynamics spectrum. And I think that really does sum up why schizoids can or might be controlling relationships. It's not always the case. It's going to vary from person to person, like which role they take. As I mentioned earlier, I made a video on the master slave unit by Masterson, and on this particular slide that's up here, and I was explaining the nuances of the spectrum and that this role playing could be used in a constructive way with personal growth. As I said, you will find it in the description below. I hope this video was informative, and I hope that it helps you to see more of the bigger picture of schizoid dynamics and the different ways that this can manifest. Goodbye.